Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Henry Lambert. I grew up over on Lincoln Street many years ago, and I'm glad to be a facilitator for this second session. Actually, a repeat of the one that we did this afternoon at 1, but we may get into other things, so it may be a little different. Every community has a story, like every individual, every person has a story. And what we're going to hear today is a little bit from my brother, Ray Lambert, who is older than I. He was born just before the Civil War, at the Second World War.
Oh, my.
And, Evangeline, I knew her as Evangeline Tremblay, Evangeline LaRock now, who lived and grew up in this immediate area. So with that, I'm going to simply turn it over to Brother Ray, and you have the mic.
Thank you. Hank said he grew up over on Lincoln Street. Well, I was raised there in the same house, but I never grew up. Still a kid. Anyway, our focus today is going to be about the Steinhauer House or Hotel and its environs. We're not going to do a history of Highgate, but we're trying to focus on this particular area, which has, from the perspective of the town fathers and mothers, some developmental possibilities. So we wanted to give you some background, and we'll start off with this. There was a family named Steinhauer in Poughkeepsie, New York, in that area, and some other families who were of German ancestry who had been Hessians and were sympathetic to the British. It wasn't very comfortable for them to remain in the area once the Revolutionary War was over, so some of them decided they'd move north into Canada. And so they moved north, and they settled up near the Rock River in that area, first of all. And the border had not yet been drawn. So when it was drawn, it was supposed to be drawn at the 45th parallel so that the Rock River would actually be in Canada. But lo and behold, the line was drawn above them. So they became American citizens despite themselves. So that was in 1787. Johann Steinhauer and his son George Sr. and their wives, and there were also George's 5 oldest children who came up and settled in 1787. The next year, Henry Steinhauer was born. He was one of the very first white settler child born in this area. Now, the George Sr. Steinhauer family now, because they didn't want kind of a German Hessian connotation to their name, so apparently they sort of contracted the name from Steinhauer to Steinhauer, sounded less German. The Steinmetz family changed their name to Steinmetz, and there are descendants that have lived here in the area for a couple of centuries almost. And so when that took place, there was that settlement up there near the Rock River. Gradually there was a settlement that took place a little further down what we call the St. Armand Road now. And that, right at the bend, there's a farm there that was called the Steinhauer Farm. Years later, because it was Henry's, not Henry's, but George Jr. Had a farm there, and then his son subsequently lived there in the late 1800s. And around 1930 or somewhere in that area, 30, I think it was 35, my grandparents, maternal grandparents, Henri LaRoche and Maria LaRoche, bought that farm. And we knew it as the Steinhauer Farm. Now, when Henry established his living, he was a tanner. And it was said in the Vermont Historical Gazetteer that he had the tannery in Highgate, but the Swanton history indicates that there was a tannery built by him in Swanton in 1814. Well, in 1833, he decided he'd had it. No more tanning hides. He wanted to do something else. This place right here, this whole area was without any houses. There were no churches. There were no buildings whatsoever. He built one of the very first buildings in what we now call Highgate Center, and we know it now as the Steinhauer House. It was one of the first buildings in Highgate Center. So, given that, he hosted people because it was a hotel and a stagecoach run. The St. J and LC, otherwise known as by the locals as the St. J and Long Comin', was built only in the 1870s. So it was a stagecoach stop, and some people would stay overnight. There was a livery, etc. So he was a prime mover. The man who built the house that still exists and now owned by the town was a prime mover of having the village of Highgate Center built. And in 1868, when the Vermont Historical Gazetteer volume about Franklin County, including Highgate, was published, he had died just a year before. It was stated that there were now in Highgate, not yet known as Highgate Center, but there was going to be a post office by the Postal Department labeling it Highgate Center. I mean, you had to send the mail to some place, not just Highgate. So this became Highgate Center. And at that particular time, there were 46 houses in the town of Highgate Center. As a kid in 1950, I did some counting. I knew everybody in every house in Highgate Center. They knew me. I couldn't get into a lot of mischief. They'd report me right off to my parents. I counted the houses, and there were 50. So there was a growth of 4 houses from that period of time until my early years in Highgate Center. So with that, I'll turn it over to Hank.
Okay, thanks very much, Ray. And Evangeline, would you like to take over and tell us something about your memories? And
I would like to share a bit. My earliest recollections of this property as a child in the 1940s. It was owned by Court Laux. It was a beautiful private home with lovely manicured flower gardens. In fact, it was exciting for me almost to journey across the street from my home, which was and is still standing, the brick house across from Mr. Laux's, to walk across the street from my home and to get drinking water from Mr. Laux's. He had a spring with a hand pump at the side of the house, and have photos of my mom, my dad, and myself beside the driveway in one of his beautiful gardens. I do regret not having written down my dad's, Amity Tremblay's, memories of the inn when its residents were overnight passengers who arrived by horse-drawn coaches to await their departures the following day. They were provided with a good night's rest and meals. Of course, there was a livery stable, as Ray mentioned, on the property, and a wheelwright shop to attend to the needs of the horses and carriages. I guess I'll share a few more memories of the site. A gas station and a garage owned by Cleo and Wiley Raymond. I don't recall Mr. Laux, but I hear Mr. Laux had this.
I'm much older than you are.
Well, not much, but so the memories that I hold are that the Raymond brothers had a gas station. There was also Rudy Messier's barber shop here. On one side was the barber shop, and then on the other side was the snack bar run by Mrs. Campana. And in later years, it was known by R&J's, run by Peggy Perry and her son John, and also the Steinhauer Cafe, run by Rosalie Macy. The garage, owned and run by Ephraim, better known to all of us as Fagey, Maishi, in this very building, he operated from this site where we sit today. The Maishi property was conveyed to Ephraim and Rosalie by deed of Ethan E. Asseltine in March of 1965, and then the property was purchased from the town of Highgate in 2017. And that's all that I have at this time.
Thank you, Lynn. The Steinauer House, of course, is the focal point of, and the properties that have been acquired by the town right adjacent to the house itself are prime properties for a community that wants to create a true community center. And the project is called the Core Project for that reason. And many communities around the state are doing that very thing, preserving and enhancing community by virtue of a core center and reviving that. Would you like to say something, Ray, about the monument on the park?
Yeah, the monument, of course, the dominant feature of it is the image of a soldier facing north, even though the soldiers went south, with a minor exception of the St. Albans raid, when some people, maybe some of them weren't soldiers, chasing the Confederates back into Quebec. That monument was built and dedicated, and Woody Arouse has some information here about its dedication and the celebration of that monument at the Steinauer House. Mm-hmm. It was a kind of a 2-day affair with the menu is here, and there are 199 names of Civil War veterans on it. Plus, the number, I've got it somewhere, I think it's about 5 for the Spanish-American War. It was dedicated in 1911 in July. And that monument, I think, is very symbolic of what this particular area is and in terms of what the prospects are. Those 199 names consist of about 47 who were French Canadian. The French Canadians do not appear in the written histories of Highgate, nor do they appear in the town histories of any towns that I'm aware of in Vermont, except for a nominal mention. So-and-so drowned, period. Nothing mentioned about their contributions. Well, that monument over there is a tribute to the contributions of the 199, but also of those French Canadians, some of whom were born in Quebec, some born here in Highgate, who went and saved the United States. We still are the United States because of those men. If it were not for them, we would not be here as citizens of a United States of America. Now, I think it's symbolic that that soldier is looking at the Steinauer House, because he's looking at a house that was built by someone who was born in this particular community, one of the very first born, and who established a community by his own efforts and example. It's a monument, if you will, of its own. And they're sort of looking at it and saying, we're part of this. And I think as a community in Highgate, I used to live here in Highgate, of course, as a youngster. I'm now a resident of Florida. But I think it's incumbent upon the citizens of this town to just think seriously about the question of whether something that is of that historic significance is to remain. To be finished, refinished, yes. Of course, it needs a tremendous amount of work. As I was telling Woody, the town of Milton has a history of doing this kind of a thing with the Standard House, General Standard, who led some of the Highgate soldiers whose names are on that monument in the Battle of Gettysburg. So I guess I'll end there, lest I go on too much.
Okay, great. It's time for some reflections of your own. Do you have memories, questions, some issues you'd like to raise about the Steinauer House, historical issues, the monument, and this immediate area? Anybody?
It's a quiet crowd. The day is ending.
Yes, it is.
It's time for a cocktail.
Yeah.
Did all the Saks have something to do with the over on
Yeah.
the St. Army Road?
Yeah, but
Back along down the hill?
Right.
The Sachs monument is there. He was one of the the Sachs
Well,
family.
he thought he was in Canada at one
Yes,
time.
yes, oh yes.
Okay.
As did all of the settlers up there at that particular time. They had reason to wish that they were,
Yeah.
because they, the American Revolution had just ended. They were sort of persona non grata, being known for whom they supported down there in New York. So they wanted to hightail it into Quebec. Well, not too far into Quebec, It gets cold up there. So, but the line was drawn above them. So now we have a history, if you will, because it can be attributed to these people who thought they were somewhere else.
Yeah.
yes.
Okay.
Ray, you have a story about a picture taken with Mr. Courtlauk's pumping gas.
Yeah. In 1944, when the war was going full blast, I was going on to be 7 years old. I hadn't quite made it yet. It was June. It was time for First Communion at the St. Louis Catholic Church, about 700 feet down the road. So Dad brought me to Swanton, to Pearl's clothing store, and bought a new suit for the occasion. And Mom, after that, took a picture of me over there on the corner. We lived on what we call the house on the corner. And there I am, with a little white armband, new suit, standing there looking very holy. And right over my shoulder is the current library, just the front of it. But in back, way in back, there's this figure pumping war-ration gasoline into a car. And it's Courtlauk's. Courtlauk's, who would once in a while back out his car. A big old sedan. As I remember it, it was kind of this color. And he, and it was like an event.
An event.
At least I recall it as an event, because he would open up the garage door, he'd get in the car, and he'd rev it up, and the motor would run like crazy, and then he'd jam that car into reverse, and it would grind away. And I remember distinctly hearing somebody hollering, "Grind me a pound, Court!" It was just one of those things. Court was just a really kind of an interesting gentleman. Do you want me?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll go
Yeah.
on. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't want to
Yes.
dominate it, but
When he opened the store?
what's that?
Is that when he opened the store where Jake's used to be?
No,
No, he-
no. He had this gasoline station, but he served ice cream. It was the best ice cream, Borden's ice cream, and my favorite was Rocky Road. So one day, for some reason or other, I'm snuck out of the house, and I'm over here near McEwen's, where the gas station is over there. And I'm over here to see this first black person I've ever seen in my life. And somehow or other, I overhear him say, "Where's the railroad station? I've got to pick up something." And so I overhear him, and I know where it is. And so I hop into the pickup truck, and we go and we pick up some. He picks up the luggage that had been misplaced or misshipped. It was supposed to go to Highgate Springs to the, at that time it was called the Tyler Riston House, a hotel or house. And so he gave me a nickel and dropped me off. And so I hightailed it right over to Courts and got some Rocky Road ice cream. So that was,
Good stuff.
yeah, it was good stuff. It was really good.
Evangeline, you have something to add?
I could add a bit. I would leave the Steinhauer House topic. I would go to the Cogswell Foundry, which was also on this site. It was owned by Mr. Floyd Cogswell from Springfield, Mass. He owned 2 machine shops in Agawam, Mass. In years past, there was a machine shop in that area owned and operated by his son. The foundry in Highgate Center was built in 1945. It began its operation in January of 1946. And these were some of the employees: Herbert Truax, manager; Samuel Austin, truck driver. In the office, there was my sister, Norma Trombley. Rita Bushy was also clerical. Charles Nye Jr. and Miss Peasley. And what they did with at this business, there were castings that were delivered to Massachusetts, and in return, on the return trip, there was raw material. There was the pig iron. I remember walking to the foundry with my sister, which was at the time located over where the arena, over on the other side of the tracks, when she worked there. She would come home for lunch and then and ask me if I wanted to go to work with her, and of course I did. And so off we would walk back to work. And those are fond memories. And of course, we lived in the brick house, so it was an easy walk, and it was good. In the fall, in October of 1951, the business was sold to R.W. Raymond of St. Albans, and on December 15th in 51, the foundry burned. The Raymond brothers, Cleo and Wiley, tore down the old portion of the foundry. They built, owned, and operated the gas station on the southeast portion of the property, bordering Main Street, now Route 78, which I had referred to previously. And that's all that I have.
That's a nice memory. The foundry being an important part of the culture and the activity in this particular area. I have a question, and maybe some of you know the answer. It's not on our program, but there were when I was in the late 40s, early 50s, there was what was called the DeZorsey store on the corner of the Gore Road.
That's right.
Your father's Trombley store, and there was a Ectus Lemna had a meat market.
No.
Fishing tackle.
He had
Fishing tackle.
It was a grocery
It
store.
It was a grocery store, but it was a
was-
much smaller scale.
It was right
across the
Yeah.
road.
And it was one story. One story. It was between
You're right.
the Forester's Hall and the gas station?
Yeah.
That's correct.
Yeah,
It was a
okay.
fishing store. My
And-
grandfather was there to get fishing tackle.
At one time, I understand that was the customs house.
Yeah.
That was where the folks that were headed to Canada were required to stop here.
American Customs House.
And then it became
My grandfather
Actus's.
worked out of there. When I
Fort
was
Loudon,
a
did he also own right where Ellen, well, Pause for Thoughts is too? Because that's where Jody's Orchard learned how to cut meat.
Where's that?
Right where Pause for Thoughts is. Fort Loudon had a meat store there. Jody's Orchard used to cut meat there. That's where he learned to.
I don't believe so.
I-
It was a Dorset owned for a while.
I know, Fort Loudon did too. Because Mrs. Mary Moss used to live across the street, right where Conley lived now. And Joe said that's where he learned how to cut meat, was over at Charlie Moss's place. When
Oh,
I was working for him.
No.
Cross and Boss.
Cross and Boss
was
Meat
behind.
Market, which is where my house now sits.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was the meat market.
That was,
Wayne
Yes.
Boston's father.
during World War II, when we lived on the corner, I have to call it, Mom would send me over to Cross and Boss to get liver.
Okay.
It was free.
Oh, it could be
You
right.
could get, didn't beat the price. so I remember. But she also sent me over with ration coupons.
Oh, yes.
Because you could only buy a certain amount of meat, and the same with gasoline. If you will indulge me on
Yeah.
just a World War II
Oh,
ending story.
yes.
On VE Day, on May 8th, the town had a celebration. It was on the Village Green, and people just came and flocked into the area. Court Laux and his filling station and car repair place, and he had stored up somehow some fireworks, and he sold them to all comers. And he made a profit that night, and he made a killing because people wanted to set off those fireworks, and they did right there, right near the statue and all along the park. Well, we just lived across the street, and I was kind of like, I wanted to get into the action. But Dad had nothing to do with that. He had an old fire truck crank and a siren, and he had somehow acquired that in his dickering, and he spiked it to a tree stump in front of our house. And anybody who wanted to have a turn could make that thing go and wheel that turn around, and it just wheeled around. And so I finally got a turn, and by golly, as I was turning that, I think I was looking down the hill, and there comes up these nice-looking women from New York City who are vacationing at the Manor Mayfair. Well, by God, didn't that siren just whirl a little bit more? And I thought that it was because they were in admiration of what I was doing.
Oh, and they
And it wasn't. It was so. That was a part of the memory of that amazing day, VE Day. But to top it all off, Dad said, "Okay, I guess we've had enough." And so he pulled it off and he put it on the back of his pickup truck-like box that he had put in the trunk of his old Pontiac car, because he dealt with secondhand furniture and things like that, and sort of like his pickup. And so he nailed that thing down there, and so Henry Boudreau, who had been very seriously wounded in World War II at Anzio Beach, was there, and he was in his army uniform, looking splendid. He took a whirl at it before it got off the stump, and then he got in the back of the car, and he stood there in the back of the car, and there was somebody, I don't remember who, but Georgette Fraser was sitting right there. She had an eye on Henry. She was sitting right there in the back seat, and my sister Catherine, and I was sitting in the front seat, and Daddy drove that thing with somebody twirling that doggone siren all the way to East Highgate and back, and Henry was in his glory, just waving to the crowd, or waving to the cows, I guess, because there were some open spots. But it was a glorious, glorious day, and it was so wonderful to have Henry, who eventually received the Silver Star for his really valiant efforts in Anzio. So anyway, that was a memory that's associated with Court Laux, but it also is kind of like a family
That's
affair.
great. That's a fun story.
We used to have a horse stable in the back too, right?
Yes, yeah. Well, I'll tell you a story about that. I don't know if any of you are old enough to remember, but by golly, Hitler was a gall-darn mean son of a... people didn't like him whatsoever. And by golly, in Highgate, he surely wasn't liked, because right on that side of that building that you just mentioned, there were the words painted as big as you could see in letters that went, "To hell with Hilter."
You can see that in one of the photos.
Oh, is that right?
I spotted it. I said, "Oh my goodness, there was graffiti back then." I saw HELL. So that
Yeah, and it was they misspelled it, but they cut the message across.
That's Frenchman's
Any comments, questions that would enrich our story about the center? Unless you have more to add, Ray and Lynn?
Well, I think I've talked enough, but I'll just close with this. I told Hank a few weeks ago when we came to the planning meeting, and the planning was about the environs, Steinhauer House and environs, not the whole city. The whole town become a city. If this becomes, I truly wish it would become an annual event for Highgate. Not that I would be sitting here, but you know what I mean. For the sake of the town, and maybe, the history would spread out to another area. And anyway, it goes along this line, and I learned today that it was not the fault of anyone, it was Mother Nature. But for years, when I come up to Highgate, I typically stop at the old St. Louis Cemetery. I want to pay tribute to my third great-grandparents, Lamberts, who were the first settlers here. They came around the same time that Henry Steinhauer, or just a few years prior to when Henry Steinhauer built this place. And the stones are up, and they're thin. They needed cleaning. I got paid for getting them cleaned. Got them straightened out. Came back about 2 years later. They were on the way out again. One of them had fallen over. This year I go, they're not there anymore. I've lost a physical connection.
They're actually missing?
They're gone.
Really?
I've been told that this has happened in the St. John's Cemetery in Highgate Falls. There's something about, I'm not a geologist, but there's something about the sand, the water, and stones that don't have a base that are subject to, sudden freezing and thawing,
Yes.
which that's my guess. So there's a loss, a physical presence, if you will, of my own ancestors. Okay, what's the connection with what we've been doing today? The town of Highgate has a physical presence of something that connects to their very, very early history. And I pray to God that the townsfolk consider seriously that they preserve that place by whatever means can be done. So to that end, when after my sister Barbara died, I sent a check to my niece Laura, and I said, just convey this to, I can't remember what the outfit was, the name of it, just as a memory, in remembrance of, to preserve for it was made out to the Highgate Library, I think, to preserve that place. And if the folks in charge are so like-minded that they might put up a plaque that's in memory of our parents. And possibly others would make similar contributions, and that place, like the Lord Jesus, will rise again.
Yes.
On that note, we'll call it a day. Thank you so much for being with us. And,
Well, I got a quick question.
Yeah, sure, Richard.
And I've heard a few people mention it, a little grove of maples over here. They said at one time there was a house.
There was.
Okay.
The people, the hired hands around town, when I was, in my early years, they would come down and stop at Desorcy's store. They'd get a big quart bottle of Ballantine, and they'd go, and this would be on Saturday night. Sunday was off, their day off, and they would sit in that cellar hole. And of course, us kids, we could get a nickel a bottle, so we'd go there and we'd hunt up things after Saturday night, and, make a nickel or two.
So how long ago before that was the house on?
Yeah, I don't know.
Fire.
Yeah, it probably was. Yeah.
Cinder from the founding colony?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, that house had gone before that. Yeah, yeah,
Not sure which house.
yeah,
It was right-
yeah, right next to
The
the street.
trees are about in the
Yeah,
square.
yeah, and the trees were growing up when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Now I looked at them today. I said,
Sure.
my God, they're
Trees now.
Yeah, they're amazing. Oh, by the way, if anybody wants, I've got handouts here that if you want about some of the things I put together. Thank you, Hank.
Anything else? Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.